it's Jessi, and today I will be reviewing the Wayfarers series by Becky Chambers. The Wayfarers series is a sci-fi series of 4 novels that don't really have an overarching plot because each of the novels follows kind of a different group of characters in the same world. So there's kind of a progression of story-ish in that each one follows on chronologically after the other one, but the stories themselves aren't really connected. So I will briefly talk about each book individually, and then we'll talk about the series overall. So the first book is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which is about the crew of the Wayfarer, and it's just a really sweet, feel-good book. It's very episodic, and it is the crew trying to get to this certain place so they can do a job that they've been hired to do. But it's just, each chapter is kind of like a moment upon of their journey, and it's just really sweet. The second book follows 2 different characters. One of the characters from the first book that I can't really talk about because of spoilers from the end of the first book, and then the other character is a girl trying to fix up a spaceship so she can get off of the planet she's stuck on. The third book follows a group of Exodans. So Exodans are humans that left Earth because Earth was a mess. Left Earth and live on a space station fleet of spaceships. And it follows them and their way of life and how they handle different things. And so it's like all sorts of different perspectives, but it's very slice of life and very sweet. And then the fourth book is about a group of different species that are all trapped during an event. And it includes one of the characters that was in the first book, so it was kind of nice to see that little bit of overlap. And so they all kind of have those weaving connections, but I want to set the expectation that, like, you'll fall in love with the crew of the Wayfarer in the first book, and then you won't see them again. So just be aware of that, because I was not aware of that, and I think it did color the rest of the series for me a little bit, because I kept being like, when am I going to get to see Kizzy again? So just something to kind of be aware of. Anyway, so it's kind of weird to talk about the series overall, given that there isn't an overarching plot between them, but I will do my best. So getting into it, characters, 10 out of 10. Becky Chambers' characters are so fantastic. Like, absolutely amazing, astounding. I love them. They're all a little bit caricaturist sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. Like, you could definitely boil them down to she's the quirky one and he's the grumpy one, but they don't end there. And I think that's the key, is that, like, they have these shortcuts that make them immediately identifiable and understandable and relatable. But then she doesn't stop there. She goes on to give them a lot more depth, explain why they are that way. And she does this in all of her series. So, like, even though, like, in all of her books. So even though you, like, go into the second one and you're like, but when am I gonna see Kizzy again? Where's Ashby? I miss Sussex. You quickly fall in love with the new cast. Like, it's so incredible. And it's so fascinating that she creates, I mean, at the end of this 4-book series, you have 24 characters more, and none of them feel the same. And that's, I think, really well done, considering it's not like you have 24 characters you're following from the beginning that have a lot of time to develop. It's, each one is in a book, and you learn who they are, and very quickly come to love them. So, characters, 10 out of 10. For plot, it's an 8 out of 10. And I think the reason it's not higher, as if 8 is bad, is because there isn't that overarching plot. And because the focus of the series isn't on the plot. So the first book, like I said, was very episodic. And it's not about the plot, it's about the characters. It's about them becoming a family. It's about the way they grow and interact with each other. So there is a plot, like there is a story, but that's not the point of the first book. The second book, the plot is a little more heavy. There's like a heist element at one point. But again, the focus is less on plot, less on the story, and more on the characters. And that's kind of the theme throughout the whole thing. Third book really, again, didn't have much of a plot at all. Like, there is one. And then the fourth one, I think, is of all of them the one that has the most plot, because there was a very clear-cut conflict from the beginning. But even then, like, all of her books are focused more on the characters and on them bonding and getting to know each other and growing and learning about the world, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the plot is there. It's not a bad plot. Like, if you strip away all of that other stuff, like, there is a story, but it's not the point. So, and then setting 10 out of 10. Oh my God, Becky. She just writes these worlds that are fantastic. And like, each one, similar to like the characters, it's a different setting every time. And some of them are better than others. Like, some of them are a little richer than others. But all of them feel real. Like, it's just the way she develops these spaceships and planets. It's so rich, and there's so much depth, and it feels real. And then I'm gonna throw in the cultural element here of the different alien races, because I feel like this is probably the best place to talk about them. The cultures, like, it would be so easy for Becky Chambers, who has written how many different alien species into this series, to go full Planet of Hats. And there's a little bit of that. Like, don't get me wrong, there is a little bit of that. But she doesn't. She doesn't just like say, hey, the Aluans are all like this, and I'm forgetting all of the other alien races. But it would be very easy for her to do that. And she doesn't. The Acaraks are all like this. Like, there are some of that. Like, the Acaraks? No. What is Syssix? But like, the one alien race that is very affectionate and physically affectionate and does a lot of touching and things like that. But she doesn't really fall into that, because there is that overarching, like, yes, this is what their culture has. This is something from their species, because we're not talking just about different cultures. Like, we're talking totally different species that are going to have different physical needs. So she does have a little bit of that, but like, then it goes on to a deeper depth beyond that, where there are some characters that don't like that as much, or there's some characters that go full on into it, and it's just, this kind of straddles between what's character and what's setting, but it's the culture she builds into these places are just fantastic. And then the thought behind it, the scientific thought behind it of like, well, what would an actual species like this be? What are the things we define as life, and are they actually necessary? Which is like one of my favorite topics in biology. Like, astrobiology is fascinating, and the way like we've been redefining life to be like, hey, if we restrict life based on only what we've experienced on Earth, what kind of life would we miss out on? Just one of my favorite things. So she really explores that, and she explores it a lot more in her novella, To Be Taught If Fortunate, which is fantastic. But like, she explores that here, and it's just so good. General appeal. If you can't tell that I love this series, I gave the general appeal here a 10 out of 10. Like, no, this isn't perfect, but like, I love it. And like, if I were to just like blindly rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, it would be getting a 5 out of 5. So 10 out of 10 for general appeal. Writing style also gets a 10 out of 10. Becky Chambers has this way of describing things that I'm in awe of. She just, how do I even put it? She can like take a complex scientific idea and break it down and explain it in the simplest of terms, but she never makes you feel stupid for her having to explain it that way. And I think that's honestly a magical power. I think it's magic. I think she has been blessed by a witch. But the other thing she does well is info dumps. Like, if you have any like deep sci-fi fantasy series, you're gonna have info dumps. Like, there's no way to avoid them. At some point, you're going to need to explain something to the audience. Becky Chambers does this in a way I have literally never seen another author do info dumps as well. Because the way she does it is she'll have like, more often than not, it's 2 characters talking to each other. Sometimes it's more. And one of the characters is serving as like the self-insert for the reader, which is common. Like, this is why you have like so many fantasy series start out with the clueless farm boy, because then that character can act as the self-insert for the wise mentor to explain everything to the reader. But the way she does it, it's not like, ah yes, I'm just listening to my master lecture me about how the magic works. It's very interactive, where they're asking questions. It feels like a natural conversation. It feels like if I went up to a friend of mine and I was like, hey, so there's this new hobby you've picked up, could you tell me about it? And they're just telling you about something they're passionate about, and you get to learn it that way. That's what it feels like. And I don't know what she does to pull that off so that it feels like that kind of conversation and not like a lecture, but it's so brilliantly done. And like, she does it through all of them. And that's how she gets across these like complex alien races, and how she tells us so much about these fascinating worlds she's created. It's so, so well done. From there, going on to Originality. Now, here I will put a big disclaimer that I do not read a lot of sci-fi, and I especially don't read a lot of space opera sci-fi, which is, I think, what this is. But I give it a 9 out of 10. I've never read anything like it, like, ever. So, I take that for what you will. Going on to the ending then. As always, if you don't want to set expectations for yourself, go ahead and skip to the next timestamp. I won't be hurt, I promise. So you can skip ahead if you don't even want to set expectations, but I will keep it very vague, talking in overarching ideas, but you know, I get it. So for the ending, I gave it an 8 out of 10. So this is because the story is so disconjointed between the books. It's kind of hard to give the series overall an ending score, because it's not like it was one story and this is the end of the story. So I kind of looked at it as 4 separate endings for each of the novels, and in the end I give it 8 out of 10. She has a habit, Becky, bless her heart, has a habit of like leaving things kind of open-ended at the end, which is fine-ish. But I wish things were a little more closed. But she also makes the endings, they're so heartwarming, and that's kind of the other thing. For me, I like an ending that's a little more harsh sometimes, but these books aren't doing that. And if that's what you're looking for, this is not the series for you. But all the endings are very heartwarming, sometimes a little bittersweet, and then very open, which is, I think she does it well, but it's not necessarily elements I would love. You know, I like it and don't love it. All right, so bringing it all back together, this series as a whole gets a 9.45 out of 10. So insanely high, because it's fantastic. I did mention this in my ending, but in case you skipped it, this is a heartwarming, fun, happy, at times bittersweet, but overall just warm hug of a series. So if you're not looking for that, you're not gonna like this. If you're looking for something where people are gonna be harsh, where there's gonna be difficult conflicts, there is conflict. Don't say there isn't conflict, but there isn't like gruesome horrors of war conflict. There isn't characters making really tough decisions conflict. The conflict is more about characters figuring themselves out. So if you're not looking for that, obviously it's not going to quite work for you, but it's like a warm hug. And I've heard it compared to House on the Cerulean Sea, and I will agree to that, except I think there's a lot more depth to this than there was for House of the Cerulean Sea. House of the Cerulean Sea is very surface level, I think, whereas Wayfarers, I think, goes a lot more in depth, and it's a lot more nuanced in the discussions it's trying to have. But overall, that is it for me. Like down below if you enjoyed this. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit burpy. And leave a comment down below. Let me know if you've read The Wayfarers, what you think. If you have suggestions for similar series, it doesn't have to be sci-fi. It could be fantasy with a similar vibe of found family and warm and fuzzy feelings. If you have recommendations, I would love to hear them, because this was just so sweet, and it was just such a nice series to read, especially immediately after Poppy War. Let me tell you, I needed this. But yeah, that's it for me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.